I hope you have learned since your previous attempt. Lightning descends.
Come on!
They grow unstoppable. Don't give up so early. One cannot outrun time. I'd be weary of its breath if I were. Closely. Prove to be food or fatal. I suggest you aim for the head. Heads. Some.
The might of Selfish.
icicle. Be still. My service is finally over.
Hold up, and I'm still standing.
Hello! This is going to be a build guide for my idea for a Beira's Anguish Ritualist. Now, this was a lot more difficult to do before, but this league we got the Self Immolation node, which ignites you cause are reflected back to you, which means that if you can ignite an enemy, you can ignite yourself, and you can trigger Beira's Anguish. Beira's Anguish is a charm that grants immunity to ignite when it's active, is used when you become ignited, and it creates ignited ground for 4 seconds when used, igniting enemies as though dealing fire damage equal to 500% of your maximum life. So, ignited ground has a 2 meter radius by default, a 4-second duration, which makes it kind of difficult to scale, because this charm used to ignite enemies in your presence, which was way better, but when they made it easier to trigger yourself in this league, they also nerfed how it's applied, and it kind of sucks, but I digress. Now I'm triggering this with Birth of Fury. Drop ignited ground while moving, which lasts 8 seconds and ignites as though dealing fire damage equal to 10% of your maximum life. You can use just rare boots and a spell to ignite. It'd be way better overall probably, but I try to have as few button presses as possible in my builds. So, and I also quite like trying to use like low level uniques or like uniques that nobody uses in builds and stuff like that. The next item is Bijou Born. We use this for the line X reduced charm effect duration. The reason for that is a charm cannot be triggered while it's already in use. So this is a 3-second duration, and this would reduce that by up to 50%. So 45 to 50% is perfectly fine. The closer you get to 50%, the more expensive, but 45 to 49 pretty cheap. This has also some max mana, some charm slots you don't care about, some dexterity that doesn't really matter to the build, increased charm charges gained on the implicit and explicit, which only really matters for the cast on charm use skill, and then I also have this corrupted for some lightning res. Obviously you can get this corrupted with whatever suits your build better. One thing to quickly note is for unique items or any item at all that has a skill on the item, the level of the skill will determine the minimum level required to equip it. So I have a level 12 cast on charm use on this belt, which has a requirement of 46. If I got a higher level skill, it would have a higher level requirement. So something to keep in mind when you're buying items that with skills on them, when you want to equip it, if you want to equip it early, you're going to have to look for a lower level skill, and so on and so forth. The next item we're using is the Unborn Lich. This is a staff that was added in the current league. It basically works similar to Kano Kulamak from Path of Exile 1 if you played that. Basically, you'll drop the staff, it will have X number of unrevealed desecrated modifiers that you'll then take to the Well of Souls and reveal them yourself, kind of like a craft your own unique. The reason that I decided to use this is because it has block chance on it, which which no other staff does. And then it also has some other stats. This exact setup of block chance with increased elemental damage and increased magnitude of damage in ailments wasn't expensive to buy, but there was not many of them. So something to keep in mind, it might be difficult to find this exact setup. You'll want at least 25% to block chance, I believe. Anything lower than that and you won't be able to hit the current block cap as is easy. I tried another staff that had 24% to block chance and I only had 52 instead of 58. But if you can't get quite enough block chance on the staff, just remove defensive stance in these nodes here, get yourself to 54% block chance, and then move those points into something else, say for example Unbending or Eldritch Will or Flamewalker for more damage. And then if you can't get this exact setup, go for either block chance and elemental damage or block chance and increased magnitude of damage and ailment you inflict. One of those two will be perfectly fine together until you can find the right staff. And then for sockets, we have Greater Desert Runes. 10% of damage is extra fire damage. That works basically because Beira's Anguish stores a value equal to 500% of your maximum life as your base damage to apply the ignite with, if that makes sense. So that means that damage gained is extra will apply. Obviously, you only want damage gained is extra fire because fire can ignite and other ones can't. And we're not using any items to allow other elements to ignite. The last unique that we're using of like the core gear is Defiance of Destiny, also the most expensive item in the build really. We use this for the line recover X% of missing life before being hit by an enemy. Basically the way what this means is when you take a hit, whether you block it or not, you will recover X% of your missing life before the damage of the hit is calculated. So if the damage of the hit is less than the amount that you would recover, you just recover life instead. Now, basically, effectively that's how it works. I bought this for 4 divines at the lowest roll of 10%, which is still more than enough for the build, I reckon. And then I hit it with 2 divines and got a max roll, which is the only luck I'll ever have in this game. So it is expensive. If you can't get this, just use a rare amulet with life, strength, resistances to get you capped, and so on and so forth. Because you can get both flat life and percentage life on an amulet, on a rare amulet. Then, so this also gives increased maximum life, which is good, strength, flat strength, which is more flat life, and then increased mana regeneration rate. And we also have allocated thicket wording for recover 5% of maximum mana when a charm is used. This basically just helps offset your mana costs from the Ascendancy, which we'll obviously get into a bit more once we get to that part. Other charms besides Beira's Anguish are Arakali's Gift, recover life equal to 20% of mana flask recovery, and recover mana equal to 20% of life flask recovery. This rolls from 15 to 20%, it doesn't matter what the roll is, it's overall probably negligible. This is, the charm itself gives immunity to poison, it's used when you become poisoned. And then the last one is a Thawing Charm, which gives immunity to freeze. The reason for this mostly is because when you get frozen, you can't block. So being frozen will basically just disable one of your defense layers. On this we have recover life when used and then gain X charges per second. It's just better charge generation to get a bit more use out of the cast on charm use skill, because it only triggers when you actually use charges, not just when you trigger charms. So if you do go for Arakali's Gift, then you would probably want the highest amount of recovery you can get from flasks, or just instant recovery would be good as well. Then for the rare items, we've got armor, life, attributes that you need like intelligence, strength, and then resistances to get you capped. Same for this. Same for the helmet. I have intelligence. I don't have strength on any of these pieces because I've got too much resist. I'll maybe change these at some point. And then for the helmet I have some intelligence because the staff has 147 int requirement. I'm over after equipping some more items from the last time I respec my tree. So I can respec, I get some more strength on the tree from that. Jewelry, the rings are basically the same thing. It's just life, strength, resists to get you capped, and then attributes to meet your requirements. Same for all pieces. Then all of the runes are just greater body runes for more life. The last item to talk about quite quickly is the crossbow. Soul cores for increased vulnerability magnitude. Any crossbow base that has additional projectiles for grenade skills. Then you'll want increased attack speed as a suffix, and then at least one open prefix. Then you'll use an Omen of Sinistral Crystallization to force your next Perfect Essence to remove only prefixes. Then you'll use a Perfect Essence of Flames to add the prefix, gain X% of damage as extra fire damage. And then you'll use an Omen of Sinistral Necromancy to force your next Desecration to be a prefix. And the Omen of Leech to force your next Desecration to be an Aminamu modifier. And what this means is you'll force one of 3 choices, which is grenade skills have +1 cooldown use. You're guaranteed to get it with this crafting setup, and that basically covers the crossbow. Now, the only reason I have anything on this really is because when you weapon swap to use oil grenade, you obviously lose the damage stats from your staff. So this just gives you a little bit of damage back when you're weapon swapped. You really don't need to worry about this if you don't care too much, but yeah, that's the idea there. That covers all the items for that, and then we'll quickly go through the Ascendancy and the tree. So your second Ascendancy, you'll get Mind Phylacteries. This is basically can instead consume 25% max mana to trigger charms with insufficient charges. Basically just means that once your charms have no charges, you'll just use 25% of your mana instead. The node before it is 20% more charm charges gained. This doesn't really matter too much. It's not super important for the build. It's just you have to pass through it to get the Mind Phylacteries. And then 1 charm slot, you also don't really care about that. Your third Ascendancy will be Unfurled Finger for 1 ring slot. Your fourth will be Mystic Attunement for 25% increased bonuses gained from equipped rings and amulets. Now, I've pathed through reduced mana because it doesn't really matter too much. You're always going to use 25% of your maximum mana, no matter how much mana you actually have, and your costs aren't high enough for it to really matter. I still have 800 mana with the current items that I've got, so you'll definitely have enough mana to sustain all your spell costs and stuff like that if you path through that. But if you do end up overcapped on your elemental resistances, you can just path through this instead. And then a quick note on Mystic Attunement is basically increased bonuses gained from equipped rings and amulets means bonuses your character actually gets. So life, attributes, other things that affect your character's stats, you'll get more of. But things that affect your character, like recover X% of missing life before being hit by an enemy, that's not increased because it's increasing what your character gets, not the effect of the item itself. Just a quick thing to note there. If you can't get the Unborn Lich, or you're too low level, use the Searing Touch. I used this from the start all the way up, basically. As soon as I started using Beira's Anguish, you can use that. It just has great stats, and again, Greater Desert Runes and that. There is a version that I guess you could try. I thought about trying it, but I didn't really test anything out, but it should work perfectly fine. Is if you can get capped on everything else and you can free up a ring slot, you can use Black Flame instead. It gives some mana regeneration, some chaos res, 50% increased ignite magnitude, which is massive, 50% reduced ignite duration on enemies. It doesn't matter to you because, as far as I'm aware, ignite duration or ignited ground duration is the same. It's not affected by this because your ignite isn't actually on the enemies, which means that you can use Wither in Presence. Withered is a debuff that applies 5% increased chaos damage taken and can stack up to 10 times, so 50% increased chaos damage taken, basically 50% more chaos damage taken, or, well, 50% more chaos damage dealt. Now, one thing to note is Black Flame doesn't change, it doesn't convert your damage to chaos. You still deal fire damage, but the enemy takes chaos damage. So what this means is you still scale the build the exactly same way, but instead of using elemental weakness and elemental exposure, you would instead use like despair to reduce their chaos resistance. So this changes not the damage you deal, but the damage the enemy takes. Something to keep in mind if you do use Black Flame for another build, if you don't use it for this one. And then one last quick point on that is there's another version of the staff that has this skill, his Winnowing Flame, that has basically when you hit an enemy who's ignited, it consumes the ignite and creates pillars of flame, dealing a percentage of the highest expected remaining damage it consumed ignites. There's no ignite on the enemy to consume because it's on the ignited ground instead. So no any effect that will consume ignites, say for example like Snap or Firestorm, these won't work with ignited ground, to my understanding. So that covers the items and alternate items if you want to do that. Now, in the showcase, I actually only had 2 Ascendancies done, so I just had Intricate Sigils and Mind Phylacteries, and you watched me do my 3rd and 4th Ascendancies, so I didn't have this Amethyst Ring, and I didn't have Mystic Attunement either. I also didn't have Lay Siege, because I was only level 84, and then I got the last level after doing that Charmmancer fight. There's a lot of travel nodes early, but thankfully, Strength is kind of both damage and defense for this. You'll path down here, you'll grab all your jewel sockets where you can. You'll path into Lay Siege, and then for more block you'll go for Unstoppable Barrier, Vigilance for block and max block, Hunker Down for max block, Defensive Stance for max block, and Wide Barrier for increased block chance. You don't really care about the downside. We don't get that much armor anyway, so it's kind of negligible. It's just armor's the best defense that we have access to in the amount that we have access to it. Other nodes we'll grab on the way is Ailment Effect on these small nodes, and then Lasting Trauma for ignite or increased magnitude of ailments you inflict. These small nodes lead into Immolation for increased ignite magnitude, and then Melting Flames for enemies ignited by you permanently take 1% increased fire damage for each second they have ever been ignited by you, up to a maximum of 10%. This is only really going to affect bosses because everything else will die within the first 1, 2, 3 seconds kind of thing. We also have Self Immolation, obviously, build enabling, and then Molten Being for 5% of damage is extra fire damage, and then 5% of physical damage taken is extra fire. This is basically just 5% physical damage mitigation. We path down here up to All Natural. because these 3 nodes give 50% increased elemental damage and then 5% early res on the last one. And then these ones here is just flammability magnitude. Enemies ignited by you have minus 5% fire resist. And then increased ignite magnitude on these 2 nodes here, the main one and the small one. And then all the way up here to volcanic skin and burnout. This is 8% of damage is extra fire, 20% fire resist. Some small fire damage nodes, ignite and flammability magnitude, and then ignites you deal damage 15% faster. Now, to my understanding, again, ignited ground lasts 4 seconds. Ignite duration doesn't affect that, which means if your ignites deal damage faster, it's basically just more damage over the same 4-second duration. Duels quickly is basically just flammability magnitude, ignite magnitude, if you can get fire damage, great, and then just block chance to get you capped where you can get it, kind of thing. Then we use 2 unique duels. One is build enabling if you don't anoint it. Basically, we use a from nothing with passives and radius of pain attunement can be allocated without being connected to your tree. You can get this for any. This can basically roll any keystone on the tree, but obviously we're using it for this. This allows us to get Molten Being and Self Immolation without connecting these small nodes here. It also means that when you are still on this side of the tree early on, so long as you can get to a dual socket and equip from nothing, you can allocate Self-Immolation and start playing the build. Obviously, once you get Mind Phylacteries, any earlier than that, it's going to be horrible, because you're going to be relying on generating charges. That's what I leveled with, by trying to get as much flat charge generation as I could, and it was just awful. And then the other one we're using is Heart of the Will. Now, when I bought this, it was like 30 exalts or something like that, but now the recover X% of maximum mana when a charm is used line is like 3 to 4 divines. I'm not sure what builds are using this now for the price to be pushed up so much. But yeah, that's pretty expensive now. It wasn't when I bought it. But it's also not like really required for the build. So long as you have Thicket Warding anointed on your amulet. There is an alternative tree that I used when I was leveling. I originally pathed up through this way up to here, on this right hand side of the tree instead. I'll maybe in path of building I'll maybe do an alternate tree so you can look at the one that I used, and that one might be better to level with whilst you're using the Searing Touch before you get to the level to equip the Unborn Lich. Yeah, that basically covers that, and then the last we'll just quickly run through the skills. Now, we're using Feast of Flesh you get from the staff. This basically consumes corpses in a circle around you and gives you life and mana back over 3 seconds per corpse consumed. With that, we've got Rapid Casting for increased cast speed, Area of Effect for Area of Effect, or well, Magnified Area for Area of Effect rather, and then Unleash because you generate seals every few seconds, and then when you cast the spell with seals, it'll reoccur for each seal lost. It basically just lets you consume more corpses in the same cast if you're doing very dense content like rituals or abyss encounters. Up next is Cast on Charm use from the belt. Now this only gains energy when you actually use charges, so when you trigger it from Mind Phylacteries, you're not going to gain any energy for this. I have this linked with Lightning Warp for Cull and Shocked Ground. It won't trigger too often in normal mapping, but like when you're doing, again, dense content like Ritual or Abyss encounters, you'll trigger it a lot more often. Then Encroaching Ground to make the Shocked Ground bigger, and then Soul Drain to recover 12% of maximum mana over 4 seconds when it calls, basically. Then we're using Elemental Weakness with Efficiency for less cost, Focus Curse for less delay before it's applied, Hex Bloom for Curse Proliferation, Arcane Surge for occasional more cast speed and mana regeneration, Frost Bomb for initially applies 20% elemental exposure and 2% exposure per pulse, Cooldown Recovery for cooldown, Long Fuse so it lasts longer, Potent Exposure to apply more exposure per application, and then Second Wind 3 or restore 2% of maximum life on use per 1 second cooldown of support skills. This gives you 14% of your max life back every time you cast it. It's probably not worth using once you get enough recovery, like once you get Defiance of Destiny and stuff like that. You could probably switch off this and just have a lower cooldown on Frostbomb. We're using Ember Fusillade with Fire Mastery for +1 fire spells, or fire skills, for more base damage. Wild Shards because basically to generate more projectiles per cast. And then Considered Casting just for more damage. The reason we're using Emperor Fusillade is because there are 2 enemies in the game that are completely immune to Ignited Ground, which means you are literally completely useless against them. So that is the Molten Imp, which was added in this league. It's hideously bad. And then Plague Harvesters and the small bugs that follow them. They're fair enough, they fly. Thematically it makes sense, but from a gameplay standpoint it sucks balls to have your build completely nullified by the fact that an enemy just doesn't touch the ground. So you won't have to use it often, but when you do encounter these mobs you will have to have something besides Ignited Ground to deal with them. I was originally using Flame Blast. You could use Ember Fusillade, you could use basically any fire spell that you like if it works well with your playstyle and you actually think it's worth using. Give it a try, see which ones you prefer to use. And then we're using Overwhelming Presence, which is a buff that makes enemies in your presence have reduced elemental ailment threshold, so it's easier to apply ignites. Then with that we have Clarity for mana regeneration, or Clarity 2 for mana regeneration, Cannibalism 2 for life recovered on kill, and then Herbalism 1 for increased recovery from life flasks while a supported skill is active. Now the last thing we're using is Oil Grenade. This is a crossbow skill that you fire a grenade when it explodes, covers enemies it hits in oil, and also makes oil ground. Oil applies elemental exposure, reducing element resistances by 20%, and also can be ignited by Ignited Ground, which means that it gives us a chance to spread the Beira's Anguish ignite. However, oil ground can only be ignited once, so if it gets ignited by any other method or any other Ignited Ground effect or ignite, it means that your Beira's Anguish ignite will not spread to it. If you get the right sort of detonation and it gets ignited by Beira's Anguish's ignite, then you can spread it like over the whole screen and it's great. But if you don't, you'll just spread an ignite that deals no damage and does nothing, because Ignited Ground only deals damage when it hits 50% flammability. So if it doesn't hit 50% flammability, it does nothing. So that can feel kind of bad, but it's kind of the only option we have to actually spread the ignite. So with that, we have Persistent Ground 3. Ground surfaces from support skills apply Suppressive Ground, which is basically any enemy on it will have 30% less cooldown recovery rate, so their skills will take longer to recover if they have a cooldown. This is most noticeable on bosses. 50% increased duration of ground surfaces created by skills, and ground surfaces cannot be destroyed except by expiring. And basically this means like if you hit it with a detonator skill, it won't explode. It'll only be ignited by Ignited Ground or an ignited enemy standing on it. Then Encroaching Ground for bigger patches, Short Fuse for detonation time so it doesn't travel too far before it explodes, and then Cooldown Recovery for, well, cooldown recovery. And that's kind of the gist of it. One thing to keep in mind is when you use Oil Grenade, you will switch weapons to the crossbow, and you will lose the stats from your staff, which means that in rippier maps you might want to avoid using it at all and just focus on using Frost Bomb for exposure, and then just dealing with having a lower kind of like coverage of your ignite, because you'll lose all of your block chance because your staff is your only base block, and it can be quite noticeable. So yeah, just be aware of that. But I think that about covers everything. If you have any questions about this build or any other build or anything at all to do with the game, feel free to ask a question in the comments. If you try the build, let me know how it goes, and hopefully I'll be back with another somewhat interesting, weird off-meta build soon. Thanks for watching.